Good morning, folks. This is Mr. Dan coming to you from the Landscape Design Classroom, and today we're going to talk about using intensive gardening techniques. So, what can I do to produce more vegetables in small spaces? Let's talk a little bit about vertical planting. This is a better use of limited space. Plants trained to grow upward using fencing, poles, strings, and nets or other supports, and it can use walls or fences on the outer edges. Can use pots or pockets on a support system. A little more on vertical planting here. Plant examples would be intermediate, indeterminate tomatoes, pole beans, peas, cucumbers, and melons. The disadvantages here is it definitely requires a lot more water. There's a lot of different hydroponic systems that shoot water up through their piping and disperse water, but it definitely takes a lot more water to make this work. So we got band planting. It's also called wide row planting. Seeds planted in a band together than singly in rows. And bands up to 3 feet wide for easy reaching and for raised bed or a flat garden. So as you guys can see from the picture here on the right, there's definitely a lot of grouping going across in these types of plantings. A little bit more on this. You want to prepare soil as for a single row. Mark both sides of the band using a string pulled tight between 2 stakes on each side, and scatter seed over the band and cover as required. Thin plants to equal distance. So the thinner you make your bands, the more growth you're going to end up having, but you're also not going to have as many plants coming out. So it's kind of like that delicate balance of figuring out what's right for you. So what's suitable for band planting? Leafy crops, definitely like chard, kale, leaf lettuce, mustard, and spinach. Shade the soil and compete with weeds. So you want to make sure you have a good weeding program going into this. So poor choices here would be carrots and onions. Poor competition with weeds and is more difficult for weeding. So square planting. Square planting for a small space, usually a 4 foot by 4 foot square, 16 square feet overall. Space to walk around each planting area. Divided into sections, 2 feet by 2 feet, and then a different crop for each section. So one thing I want to stress here is do not use an entire packet of seeds in one area because you end up with a ton of plants in that area and you'll have to separate those out and make your garden larger, or just get rid of the plants. So a little bit more on square planting. Depends on crop. More plants per square foot than in rows. Each seed or plant at an equal distance. And mulching to control weeds and preserve moisture, and requires more water and fertilizer. So let's move into raised beds. So to make gardening possible where soil is poorly drained because it's coming up above the ground. So some crops which work well, which do not thrive in wet conditions, would be okra, kale, and gourds. Root crops which do poorly in heavy clay, which would be beets, onions, topsoil, radishes, rutabagas, turnips, and carrots. One of the things I would definitely do here is when you build your raised garden, I would use a mixture of topsoil, different organic matter, even compost to do that. That's going to be your richest soil, and you're going to have the best product come from that. So some disadvantages: it dries out much faster, so you definitely need to water probably about twice as much. Mulching to conserve moisture, so have a nice thin layer of mulch on top of there to conserve, to hold that moisture in so it can feed out into the plants. They require more moisture, not recommended for sandy soils. Mulching for moisture conservation, and larger tilling equipment cannot be used. Construction can be time consuming and expensive, and plants are susceptible to diseases. Personally, I think raised beds are fantastic for a lot of different reasons, especially if you use a compost or topsoil in there, but also for people once they get later in their years, so that they don't have to bend over as much to get into their plants and they can continue that fun activity. So we have non-permanent raised beds, which are easiest to build. Garden soil mounded up with 6 inches on sloping sides, and shrinks as rain compacts the soil. Must be rebuilt annually. Permanent raised beds used for perennials, sturdy sides, higher than 6 inches. Soil held in place with boards, railroad ties, rock, or cinder block. no top or bottom, and soil worked before sides are put in place. There's some material options here. You can use cedar or redwood. That's be a rot resistant wood. Pressure treated lumber approved for gardens. Plastic lumber composites and plastic liners. Personally, I like the plastic lumber because it lasts forever. Just make sure the materials in it don't seep into your vegetables. Accessible raised beds, suitable for those with movement limitations, constructed to meet a specific mobility issue such as difficulty getting up and down, balance problems, and wheelchair or walker access, and may include wide edges or benches. Personally, these are my favorite type of raised beds used because you can build them as high as you want and you can have the best soil humanly possible in those to maximize your growth. So wheelchair accessible raised beds, a large rectangular box and legs, needs wide paths with a hard packed surface. And then just let's go back for 1 second. So if we take a look here, this is great for individuals with accessibility issues, especially in a wheelchair, because you can get that wheelchair underneath and be able to continually work with it. Personally, my favorite type would be taking boards, taking the whole way to the bottom, and really getting some depth there on your topsoil, which would definitely produce the best crops as long as you're continually watering. Like it said, like I was just saying, you need to have about 2 times the watering capacity for that. So some tips for raised beds: they should be no more than 3 feet wide for easy reach. Make them only half as wide if located against a house, garage, or fence because you can't get around it. Soil can be damaged, compacted by foot traffic. Then in your soil for raised beds, friable, should crumble easily. A good mixture here would be 1 part organic material, 2 parts topsoil, and then 1 part perlite, vermiculite, or sharp sand for drainage. Perlite is those little like soft looking styrofoam pieces that you can put in your soil. I definitely recommend that for raised gardens. So fertilizing your raised beds, fertilize based on soil test results. Always do a test before fertilizing. Soil release in soil at planting or water soluble fertilizers throughout the season. Some different methods for planting raised beds: conventional rows or plants running parallel with the length of the bed. Number of rows depends on the width of the bed and size of the plants. Intensive bands or squares, all plants spaced an equal distance apart. And plants at least 6 inches from the side of the bed to prevent root drying. So if you take a look here at the picture down here, they're doing some bands within their squares, some single plants. So there's a lot of different mixtures going on here. So that is the end of my presentation. If you have any questions about different types of beds, especially raised beds, give me a call down here in the landscape design classroom. But I appreciate your time, folks. Have a great day.